What's up guys, back again with another video in the Minecraft Spigot series. This time I'm going to teach you how to serialize your Minecraft objects like items and then convert them into base64 encoding. Alright, so I'm going to assume most of you are not familiar with serialization, but it basically means that you're able to convert an object into a byte stream or a byte array. And that's useful for many circumstances. The most common circumstance is going to be for saving objects, maybe to a file or something like that. And so let's say, for example, that you have a file or an object, right? And you want to store that object into a database for some reason. It doesn't really matter what the reason is, but you want to do it. So let's say you want to use an SQL database. An SQL database has many different data types, including all of the Java primitives, and then it has a few other custom data types. But when it comes to storing objects, that gets a little complicated, right? Because how do you represent an object if it's a combination of different data types into one entity, right? So it's pretty simple if you can just use primitives, right? Like, you just want to save a simple primitive to a, an SQL table or something like that. Or if it's an object, you could, if the object is made up of primitives itself, not objects, then you could basically have a table, and then each column of the table is the different, primitive data types of, or the primitive types of the object, basically, and each column can be filled with each, value of the object, basically. So, that's a little complicated, especially when your objects get very complicated too. In some instances, your objects may include objects themselves, which just complicates it even more. So if we were to serialize that object into raw data, which is a byte stream or byte array, because as you know, hopefully a byte is 8 bits, so that's just binary data in a data type form, right? Because the Java language provides a byte as a data type, if you don't remember. And so yeah, if we convert it to a byte array or a byte stream, then we're able to save it directly to a file because we have something called a file input stream, a file output stream, and we can save it to other things other than a file, but a file would be the most popular one. But if we bring encoding into the picture, then we can convert that raw binary data, the byte stream or the byte array, we can convert that into a string using a special encoding called base64. And base64 is basically a encoding format or encoding scheme, as it says here, which is basically a way for you to format something in a different format, right? So basically what this will do is convert the raw bytes into ASCII values using a special alphabet, the base64 alphabet. So each byte in your byte array is going to be converted to a letter, or not a letter, but a character, right? Because a character can include, not just letters, but numbers and other symbols like that, okay? So, so that's basically all it's going to do. Is just going to convert your bytes into a special string, and then you could use that string and do a bunch of the different things, like save it to a database or save it into a persistent data container, as we saw last episode. So I'll show you how to do that next episode. I'll show you how to save, encoded strings into persistent data containers, but so it's really cool. The possibilities are really, really, really cool. So objects by themselves are not really hard to work with, but if you want to persist it, it's obviously very difficult, right? Because like I said before, so if we want to persist an object into a database or a file or something like that for later use, we can serialize it into a byte array or byte stream. And I keep saying byte array or byte stream, but a byte stream is basically just a byte array behind the scenes. You can think of it as a container for bytes. So you can really easily convert it into a byte array. So I'll just say that from now on. But so we're able to convert the object into a byte array, and then we could save that byte array into a file if we want to, using a file output stream or something else like that. But then we could use base64 encoding to encode that byte array into a string format for us to use, because obviously strings are very easy to use compared to raw binary data like byte arrays and stuff like that, right? So, that's a basic overview of what we're going to be doing this episode. Hopefully that all makes sense. I know it's a little confusing. You may not be familiar with byte arrays and byte streams and streams in general. I do have a separate little small series on streams if you want to check that out. It's pretty informative, I think. So check that out, and I'll be adding more videos to that soon. Okay, so I need to explain something else. So basically in regular old Java, if you want to serialize an object, the object has to implement the serializable interface, right? And other than that, the object also needs to be made up of serializable variables itself. So let's say the object is made up of primitives, right? Those are obviously going to be easily serializable because they're just primitive values. So that will be valid if you were to, implement the serializable interface. But if you had an object that implemented the serializable interface and it not only had primitives but it also had an object as one of its values, that would be problematic if the object is not serializable itself, because obviously then you can't serialize it if it's made with something that is not serializable, right? But yeah, in essence, whenever you want to serialize an object in Java, it has to implement the serializable interface, okay? But when it comes to Spigot, they have their own special interface that you can use that is meant to be used usually with configuration files and stuff like that. But like I said, we're going to be using this for just regular old serialization that we would do with regular Java. So in this case, we have the configuration serializable interface in Spigot. And this has a few implementing classes like attribute modifier, blah, blah, blah. But what we're going to be working with this episode is ItemStacks. So we're able to convert an item stack into a byte array by serializing it. And then we can convert it to a base64 encoding, which is going to take that raw byte array and then convert it into a string. And then we're going to decode it, and then we're going to deserialize it, which means to, convert it back to a string, back into a byte array, and then to deserialize it means to take it from a byte array and then put it back into an object. So we're basically just doing the exact reverse of what we did the first time. So let's go through this whole process now that I'm done explaining here. Basically, just going into this, we just need to know that instead of implementing the serializable interface for Spigot objects, it needs to implement the configuration serializable interface, which is the custom interface provided by Spigot or Bukkit, whatever you want to say, that enables certain things like these objects here to be serialized for you, okay? So let's take a look at all of that now. Okay, so I've got a new project here. What we're going to do is make a simple command so we can test this out. So let's try doing that. So now we're going to open this up here. We'll do make a new class for this command if it'll let me. So new Java class, and we'll call this serialize command. So serialize command. And this is just going to be, as we saw the last two episodes, a command that allows us to test what we're learning for this episode. So implements command, executor. Okie dokie, so let's get started here. What we want to do is, like I said before, if you want to serialize something in Spigot, it needs to, or in Java, right, you need to, implement the serializable interface. But if you want to serialize something in Spigot, then they need to extend or implement their custom configuration serializable interface. So like I said, the most prominent thing would be items and also locations, but let's go ahead and stick with items for now because that's a very common one that I've worked with so far. So what we're going to do here is make an item, or let's make a simple command that whenever they do /serialize, if they have an item in their hand, then we want to serialize that and then encode it and then decode it and then deserialize it. So let's go walk through that process right now, okay? So first things first, let's do the simple instance of here to see if the player is executing this command, because we don't want the console to be able to run this command, right? So let's open this up now. So first things first, let's get a player. So is equal to player sender. And now what we want to do is get an item that the player is holding. So that's pretty simple. I think we did that last episode, I'm pretty sure. So import that, and we'll call this item. So item is equal to p.getInventory.getItem in main hand, okay? So now that we have an item that we can work with here, we can now begin the encoding process, or the serialization process, and then we're going to encode it, okay? So like I said before, like I said a million times by now, the serialization process means to convert an object into a byte stream. So let's get started here. So the first thing we need to do is create a byte array output stream, which is going to basically hold our object's byte array after we have serialized it, basically, okay? So is equal to new byte array output stream, and like I said, I have a series on input and output streams if you're interested in that. And now what we need is a second stream. So in regular old Java, if you were going to serialize an object from an object into a byte stream, then you would use the object output stream, which is going to take an object and then basically feed it into a stream, and then we're going to take that stream and then feed it to the byte array output stream. And this will of course accept objects that are implementing the serializable interface, because of course you can't convert an object into a stream if it's not serializable, right? That's the whole point of doing this. But in this case, if the object here, ItemStack, does not implement the serializable interface, it instead implements the configuration serializable interface. That means that we cannot use this type of stream. We have to use the special stream that's provided by Bukkit, the Bukkit API. So we can actually use a Bukkit object output stream, which is the exact same thing as what we just saw, but specialized to use the configuration serializable interface, okay? So it's just a small difference here. And we'll just call this OS for output stream, and that's going to be equal to new Bukkit. And if you do Control Q, you can see what it does. It says this class is designed to be used in conjunction with the configuration serializable interface, or API, which is exactly what I just told you. It translates objects into an internal implementation for later deserialization using Bukkit input stream. Alright, so this is just a basic way we can use objects or convert objects into a stream format. So Bukkit object output stream, okay? And we need to do Control P here and ask for an output stream. So we need to connect this with our byte array output stream, because as you feed objects into this Bukkit object output stream, it needs to then put them into an underlying stream, which is going to be our byte array output stream, which is going to deserialize it and contain the byte array for us to work with, okay? So we're just going to put IO, which is the stream that we have up here, which is our byte array output stream, and then semicolon. And if you hover over this, it says unhandled exception, Java IO exception. And of course, whenever you're working with IO, exceptions can happen, so you need to be prepared to handle that. So just handle IO exception. If it'll let me type correctly, there we go. And just output that, whatever you want to do, okay? And so now that we have that, we can then start feeding objects into it. And so how do we put objects into the Bukkit object output stream? We can do os.write object. So if you want to write other data types, you can do write int, write byte, write character, write chars, double, whatever. But since we want to write an object, this special stream here provides the write object method here. Okay, so this will allow you to write an object to the underlying stream, basically. So we want to provide an object to write, and that's going to be our item here. And this is valid because the item is implementing the configuration serializable interface. All right. So now that we have written that object, we then want to make sure that we flush the stream, which, if you're familiar with output streams, that means to push it from the internal buffer out to the actual stream itself. So it's going to be actually pushed, and so the data isn't, kept in the buffer, basically. So hopefully that makes sense. Anyway, so now that we've flushed the data, that we've sent the data to the underlying byte array output stream, that means that the data has been converted to a byte array. So then we could take that byte array and store it. So byte array, we'll call this the serialized object, and then we can do io.toByte array. So that's pretty simple, right? So now we've successfully serialized an object into a byte array and then stored that byte array, which is awesome, right? So that's how you serialize an object. Pretty simple process. It's the exact same thing for regular Java serialization, except that you're not going to be using a Bukkit object output stream, and you're not going to be using the configuration serializable interface. You're going to be using the serializable interface, all right? So now that we've serialized the object into raw data, which is a byte array, we can then encode that raw data into a string format, which is the base64 format, okay? So we can do that. We're going to need a string to work with here, so we're just going to make another data type up here called string encoded object. And then now we can go down here and do encoded object is equal to, and now we want to encode it. So how do we encode it? We can use the base64 static method. So base64 is a thing provided by Java, which I showed you in the beginning of the episode. Sorry if you heard my speaker there. But yeah, we can use this. So base64 dot, and we can do the get encoder. So that's going to get the encoder and then encode it to string. So then we can provide the byte array that we want to encode, and that's just going to encode it and then return a string, which is obviously the encoded data as a string. And so now what we can do is hope that it worked, and then we can just print it out to the user so we can see what the string looks like, so we can make sure that it worked correctly. Okay, so encoded objects. And yeah, so hopefully that all makes sense. That's basically how you serialize an object and then encode the object into base64 format, which is again a special character format for converting raw binary byte data into a string, format for us to easily work with. Okay. Anyway, so now that we've done that, now that we've serialized and encoded the object, let's try, registering this command and everything like that, so we can test it out in the game. Okay. Okie dokie, so I've registered everything in the main and the plugin.yml, so we're good to go now, hopefully. So let's go ahead and test out our serialization here, okay? Alright guys, I'm on the server now, so let's go ahead and test out our new command here. So I've got a simple carved pumpkin, I guess we can use that if we want to. And so let's do /serialize, /serialize. And what that is going to do is take the item, serialize it, convert it to a byte array, and then it's going to encode it from a byte array into a string format using base64. Okay, boom, and there we go. So we got our base64 encoding, which is our item represented as a string, pretty much, and that's pretty cool, right? So that's pretty magical if you ask me. And so we can do this with locations, we can do this with items, and we can do it with other different things that are implementing the configuration serializable interface, which is pretty cool. And the possibilities are really cool with this because you can then store entire inventories if you want to. So if you want to make a player vault plugin, you can then take all the items in the inventory, serialize it, and then store it in a file, in a database, wherever you want to store it. And you can do some really, really magical stuff with that. And we're going to be seeing that next episode where we make a player vault plugin, and you get to see firsthand how you would do that. So yeah, stay tuned for that. But we're not done yet. We need to then decode the object back into a byte array, and then deserialize that byte array back into an object. Okay. So what we're going to do is do that. Okay. So let's go back to our IDE here. And so now that we have proven that we can indeed encode an object, so let's delete the object from their inventory. So p.getInventory dot get item in main hand, or set item in main hand, and let's set it to null. So that's just going to delete the object from their main hand. And if you do Control P, it says it's nullable, so that means that you're allowed to put null inside of here, which means nothing in this case. And yeah, so now that we've removed the item from the player's hand, we need to give them the item back, and we're going to do that with this string here. So the first thing we need to do is decode that string by converting it to a base64 string back into a byte array. Okay, so we're going to make a new byte array here. So byte array, we can use the same one that we have up here, doesn't really matter. So serialized object is equal to base64.getDecoder and then .decode, and that's going to return a byte array. And so we want to provide a string that we want to decode, so we're just going to put encoded object into the parameter here. So that's going to do all the decoding for you and then return the byte array. So a pretty simple process, as you can see. So this time we don't want to use a byte array output stream, we want to use a byte array input stream because we're taking in data this time, right? So byte array input stream. So we're going to call this in, or just in, that's a good name, I guess. And then we could do new byte array input stream, and we need a parameter for this. So this time we're going to be taking in data, like I said. So we're going to be taking in a byte array, which is going to be our byte array that we have here. So we're just going to provide serialized object as the parameter. So now we want to take that data that the byte array input stream is containing, and then basically put it into a Bukkit object input stream instead of a Bukkit object output stream, because we want to do the reverse of what we did last time. Instead of converting it to a byte array, we want to convert it from a byte array to a object. Okay, pretty simple. So Bukkit object input stream, we'll call this is for input stream. That's going to be equal to new Bukkit object input stream, and we need to provide a underlying input stream for us to get the data from. So it's going to be in. And so now we can use this Bukkit object input stream, and we can then start reading the bytes from the underlying byte array input stream into the Bukkit object input stream. So let's see how we can do that. So we're going to need an item to actually store this in. So ItemStack object. And what we're going to do is do is.readObject. So as you can see, we have all these read methods here. Pretty simple stuff. But if you want to read an object, so you can do the read object. And as you can see, it returns an object, which we just need to cast into a ItemStack, right? So let's do that. So right here. So ItemStack, and now it's going to be casted. Pretty simple, and let's see what the problem is. So we already have a thing called item. We'll call this new item. And then what else we got? So it says we need to add the class not found exception. So we'll just add that right there. So yeah, that should do the job for us. So that's able to then take the byte array and then form a object out of that byte array, and then put that object into a object, obviously, right? So a new item stack, okay? So now let's take that item stack and then put it back into their main hand so that we can successfully prove that we're able to take an object, serialize it, encode it, but delete the object, and then deserialize it, or de-encode it and then deserialize it. Okay, so we'll do brp.get inventory.set item in main hand new item. So that should do everything we need it to do. So just one more recap. I know I'm repeating myself a lot here, but you know, we just want to get the concepts down. So first, we're deserializing the object by putting the object into a Bukkit object output stream, which is going to send it to a byte array output stream, which is going to serialize the object for you. And then we're going to take that byte array from the byte array output stream and then put it into an actual byte array here. And then we're going to take that byte array and then encode it into a string format using the base64 encoding scheme. And we're going to store that string into an encoded object string here. And then we're going to delete the item that's in the player's hand after sending them the string just for verification purposes so they can see what it looks like. And then we're going to take that string that we have stored and then decode it back from a string back into raw, data. So that's going to be the byte array. And so we're going to take that byte array, feed it into a byte array input stream, and then we're going to use a Bukkit object input stream to take that data that's contained in the byte array input stream and then feed it into an actual object that we can, use from there. And yeah, that's the basic process for serializing and deserializing an object. And in between that, we're using encoding. And don't get confused with all these concepts here. You don't actually have to do any encoding at all. Encoding is something that we're doing voluntarily. So if you want to serialize an object into raw data and then put that into a file directly, not as strings and stuff like that, you don't have to. So you can actually just do that if you want to. You don't have to convert it into a string if you don't want to. You can just encode it into a file as raw data, basically, okay? And maybe that's something I'll explore in my Java series. But yeah, and the reason we're encoding, again, is just because strings are easier to work with, right? Yeah, so let's get started here. Let's go ahead and jump into the server and see if everything works correctly. Okay, I'm on the server now, so let's test it out. Let's try using this cow spawn egg here. So we'll do /serialize. Boom, and that, as you can see, deleted the object. It was very small, you have to pay attention, but it deleted the object after encoding it, and it also printed out the message here, and then it took that message and converted it back into an object by de-encoding and deserializing it. So watch down here very closely. So we'll use the chest now. Watch it very closely. So /serialize, and as you can see, it replaced it with a new object, but it's basically the exact same object because, we're just replicating it back again. So hopefully that makes sense. Alright, there you go. So that's the exact process of how you can serialize and then encode an object and then de-encode it and then deserialize it in that order. And you can use that, like I said, for a bunch of really cool things like serializing an entire inventory and saving that inventory and other stuff. And we'll explore that next episode, where we're gonna be making our very own Player Vault plugin. And what we're gonna do is allow players to store any item they want into a Player Vault inventory, sort of like a Ender chest basically. And we're gonna store all that data into a encoded string, and then we're going to store that string into a persistent data container. And yeah, it's going to be really, really sick. I've already made it, so you should see the video very, very soon. If you have any questions about what I showed you this episode, feel free to leave a question in the comment section below or join our Discord server. We have a big Discord server with over 1,300 members last time I checked, so if you need any help at all with your programs, you can hop into one of these help channels and get some help. You can also just hang out and get some new friends if you want to, so just make sure you click the invitation in the description below. Don't forget, in the description below, I'll also leave a link to the code for this episode so you can come back to it at any time and use it as a reference. I'll leave good detailed comments around the code so you can have a good explanation in text form too, in case you don't want to watch my awesome videos again. One final thing I want to tell you about: if you want to support this channel, you can click the join button below this video, and you can join this channel as a member for as low as 99 cents a month. If you join, you can get cool perks like a special Discord rank on my server, early access to these videos, and you get shouted out like you see on the screen right now. If that sounds good to you, feel free to join for, like I said, as low as 99 cents a month. Alright, that's it. So thanks for watching. If you like this video, leave a like. If you want to see more, subscribe. And peace.